I always believed anniversaries were sacred. A day set aside to honor the love, the trials, and the triumphs a couple had weathered together. A day where the rest of the world faded, and only the two of you mattered. I thought my wife, Emily, felt the same way, until this year. It started with a casual remark over breakfast a month ago. "Luke, I just got off the phone with your brother," Emily had said, her voice light, as if what she was about to say was of no consequence. "He's throwing a barbecue at his place. A big one. He wants us to come." I took a sip of my coffee, not sensing anything was amiss yet. "Yeah? When?" She hesitated for half a second before answering. "July 18th. The mug froze halfway to my lips. "July 18th, our wedding anniversary." I set the mug down carefully. "That's our anniversary." Emily shrugged. "I know, but it's just a barbecue, Luke. It's not like we were planning some big trip or anything." I stared at her, trying to gauge if she was serious. "Emily, we always celebrate. Every year, we do something special. Even last year, when money was tight, we still went to that little cabin in the woods for the weekend." "I'm not saying we won't celebrate," she replied, her tone placating. "But my point is, it's just one evening. Your brother is family. We can do our thing another night." Something inside me twisted. "So, let me get this straight, on the day that's supposed to be about us, you'd rather go to Jake's barbecue?" Emily sighed, rubbing her temples as if I was making a big deal out of nothing. "Luke, don't be dramatic. It's one party. Besides, we see Jake so rarely, and he's making a huge effort to get everyone together. He's choosing that date for a reason," I muttered under my breath. Jake and I had always had a strained relationship. He was my older brother by 3 years, the golden child growing up, the one who could do no wrong in our parents' eyes. I was the afterthought, the kid in his shadow. Over time, we'd learned to be civil, but there was always an underlying competition, an unspoken rivalry that neither of us acknowledged outright. If he picked July 18th for his barbecue, it wasn't by accident. But Emily didn't see it that way. "It's not a conspiracy, Luke," she said, rolling her eyes. "You're overthinking this." I let it drop for the moment, not wanting to fight over something that hadn't even happened yet. But the unease settled into my bones, refusing to leave. The weeks passed, and I noticed Emily bringing up the barbecue more often. She talked about what food she wanted to bring, what outfit she was thinking of wearing, how excited she was to see everyone. Our anniversary, on the other hand? Barely a mention. One evening, I decided to test the waters. "So," I said casually as we lay in bed, "what do you want to do for our anniversary? Maybe a nice dinner, or we could take a weekend trip somewhere." Emily sighed, not even looking up from her phone. "Luke, I already told you. We can celebrate another day. I just really don't want to miss Jake's party." And just like that, it was decided. I should have said something then. Should have pushed back harder. But instead, I let the resentment fester, watching as the woman I loved seemed more excited about a backyard barbecue than the anniversary of the day we vowed to spend our lives together. July 18th, the breaking point. The day finally arrived, and the divide between us was palpable. I woke up expecting, hoping, for some kind of acknowledgement. A happy anniversary, at the very least. Instead, I woke up to an empty bed and the sound of the shower running. Emily emerged, wrapped in a towel, her face glowing from the steam. "Morning," she said breezily, heading toward her closet. I sat up. "Morning." I waited, giving her a chance to say it. To recognize what today was. Nothing. "So, do you remember what today is?" I asked, forcing my voice to stay light. She turned, giving me a blank look for half a second before realization dawned. "Oh, right. Happy anniversary, babe." She leaned over and pressed a quick kiss to my cheek, already moving toward her dresser. "I can't believe it's here already." That was it. No warmth, no excitement. Just an afterthought. I swallowed down the lump in my throat. "So, what time are you heading to Jake's?" She checked her phone. "I told him I'd be there around 4. I might go early to help set up." I stared at her, dumbfounded. You're really going to do this? Emily groaned. Luke, we've been over this. Why are you making this into a thing? Because it is a thing, Emily. I snapped, unable to hold back anymore. It's our day, and you're choosing my brother's party over me. I am not choosing him over you, she shot back. Why does everything have to be a competition with you and Jake? Because he made it that way. I stood up, running a hand through my hair. He picked this day on purpose, and instead of seeing that, you're just going along with it. Emily crossed her arms. You're being ridiculous. I'm going, and if you want to sit here and sulk, that's on you. Something inside me broke. You know what? I said, my voice suddenly calm. Go. Emily blinked. What? Go to Jake's. Have a great time. I forced a smile. Since that's what you really want, don't let me stop you. She hesitated, searching my face for some hidden meaning. Luke. No, seriously. I continued. Maybe this is exactly what I need to finally see things clearly. She didn't say anything after that. Just sighed, grabbed her bag, and left without another word. The door closed behind her, and I stood in the silence of our home. Our empty home. A part of me wanted to believe she'd turn around. That she'd realize how wrong this was and come back, choosing me. She didn't. And as I stared at the front door, the sickening truth settled in. She had chosen. And it wasn't me. The door clicked shut with a finality that echoed louder than any slam. I stood there for a moment, staring at the spot where Emily had just been, half expecting her to come back, maybe to laugh it off, say she was being silly, that of course she wouldn't miss our anniversary. But the silence remained, thick and suffocating. I didn't know how long I stood there. Time felt different, slower, heavier, like the weight of her absence was pressing down on me, minute by minute. Eventually, I found myself sitting on the edge of our couch, staring at nothing in particular. The TV remote was within reach, but turning on the television felt pointless. I looked around our living room, at the framed photos lining the shelves. Pictures from vacations, holidays, random days when we decided to capture a moment because we thought it mattered. There was one from our honeymoon in Santorini, Emily laughing, her hair wild in the wind, her arms wrapped around me. I used to love that photo. Now it felt like a lie trapped in glass. I checked my phone, no messages, no missed calls. Just the time glaring back at me. 4:37 p.m. She was probably there by now. At Jake's. Laughing. Smiling. Acting like today was just another Saturday. I didn't realize how tightly I was gripping my phone until my knuckles turned white. I thought about the first anniversary we'd celebrated. We were broke back then, both fresh out of college, trying to make ends meet. I'd cooked her dinner in our tiny apartment, lit candles, and made a playlist of songs that reminded me of her. She'd cried, said no one had ever made her feel so special. Now here we were, 8 years later, and she couldn't be bothered to spend a single evening with me. The more I thought about it, the angrier I became. Not just at her, but at Jake too. This was his doing. He knew exactly what he was doing when he planned that party. He'd always had a knack for finding ways to one-up me without making it look obvious. Growing up, it was about who could run faster, who got better grades, who made Dad laugh more. But this was something else entirely. This was personal. By 6 p.m., I couldn't sit still anymore. The house felt like it was closing in on me. I needed answers, needed to see it for myself. I grabbed my keys, not even bothering to change out of the t-shirt and jeans I'd been wearing all day. As I drove, my mind raced with possibilities. Maybe Emily would be sitting quietly in a corner, looking miserable, regretting her choice. Or maybe she'd be looking at the door, hoping I'd show up. But deep down, I knew better. Jake's house was only 20 minutes away, but it felt like the longest drive of my life. My stomach twisted with every mile, a mix of dread and something darker, something I wasn't ready to name yet. When I pulled up, the street was lined with cars. Laughter and music spilled out into the evening air, the unmistakable sounds of a party in full swing. I sat there for a minute, gripping the steering wheel, debating whether to turn around. But the curiosity, no, the need, to see what was happening was stronger. I got out and walked up the driveway, my heart pounding like a drum in my chest. Jake's backyard was packed with people, friends, family, neighbors. The smell of grilled meat hung in the air, mingling with the faint scent of beer and sunscreen. Fairy lights were strung up across the patio, casting a warm glow over everything. And there she was, Emily, standing by the grill, laughing at something Jake had just said. Her hand lightly touched his arm, a casual, familiar gesture that made my stomach drop. She was wearing that blue sundress I'd bought her last summer, the one she'd said made her feel beautiful. She'd never worn it for me. I felt rooted to the spot, my feet heavy as concrete. I watched her toss her head back, laughing at something Jake whispered in her ear. The way she leaned into him, her body language relaxed and easy, like this was exactly where she wanted to be. Like he was exactly who she wanted to be with. My vision blurred for a second, not from tears, but from rage. I didn't even realize Jake had spotted me until I heard his voice, loud and smooth, cutting through the noise. Well, look who decided to show up. Emily turned, her smile fading when she saw me. Her eyes widened slightly, but she didn't look guilty, just surprised. I forced myself to walk closer, my heart pounding like a sledgehammer. Luke, she said, her voice cautious, like I was some stranger she wasn't sure how to approach. What are you doing here? I wanted to laugh. What am I doing here? That was our question. It was our day. But instead of laughing, I just stared at her, then at Jake, who had that smug, infuriating grin plastered on his face. Funny, I said, my voice low. I was about to ask you the same thing. For a moment, the world seemed to hold its breath. The chatter around us dimmed, or maybe it was just my mind drowning everything out. I stared at Emily, waiting for something, an explanation, an apology, anything that could stitch back the pieces unraveling inside me. But she just stood there, her face unreadable, clutching a red plastic cup like it was the only thing anchoring her. Jake was the first to break the silence. Didn't think you'd make it, little brother. His voice had that same cocky tone he'd used our whole lives, like every word was a jab disguised as a joke. Emily shifted beside him, her hand dropping from his arm like she suddenly remembered it didn't belong there, not in front of me, at least. I thought, she started, her words trailing off like she wasn't sure where they were supposed to land. I didn't expect you'd come. You didn't expect me to come? I repeated, my voice low but sharp enough to cut through the summer air. I could feel people glancing our way, curious but pretending not to eavesdrop. You mean to the party you chose over our anniversary? Emily flinched, a flicker of guilt crossing her face, but it was gone as quickly as it appeared. Jake stepped in, his grin never fading. Come on, Luke. Don't be dramatic. It's just a party. No need to get all sentimental. That did it. I turned to him, my jaw tightening. Yeah, funny how you picked this exact date, isn't it? Jake shrugged, unbothered. Didn't even cross my mind, man. Guess it's not that big of a deal if you're here instead of doing something romantic. His words hit harder than I expected. The audacity of it, the way he said it like I was the one who'd forgotten, like I was the one out of line. I took a step closer, my heart pounding in my ears. You've always been good at pretending things don't matter when they do, Jake. But we both know you picked this day on purpose. He chuckled, shaking his head like I was some kid throwing a tantrum. Man, you really think everything's about you, huh? Before I could respond, Emily grabbed my arm. Luke, can we just talk somewhere else? Her voice was a mixture of frustration and embarrassment. She didn't want a scene. She wanted me to play along, to pretend none of this was as bad as it felt. But I wasn't going to pretend. Not anymore. Without waiting for her to pull me aside, I turned and walked toward the driveway. I heard her footsteps behind me, quick and hesitant. We stopped near my car, far enough from the party that the music dulled to a background hum. She crossed her arms, her body tense. What are you doing here, Luke? I laughed, but there was no humor in it. Seriously? That's your question? She rolled her eyes, the defensiveness creeping back in. I didn't mean it like that. She sighed, brushing her hair out of her face. I didn't think you'd care this much. It's just one anniversary. Those words hit me harder than any insult. Just one anniversary? I repeated, my voice quieter now, but every syllable laced with disbelief. Emily, do you hear yourself? This isn't about one day. It's about the fact that you didn't even hesitate to ditch me for a party. She opened her mouth to argue, but I kept going. I've been thinking about this for weeks. Trying to convince myself it wasn't a big deal. But standing there, watching you with him. I stopped, my throat tightening. I can't pretend anymore. Emily looked away, staring at some spot on the ground like it held the answers she couldn't find in me. I didn't do anything wrong, she muttered. That snapped whatever restraint I had left. You didn't do anything wrong? I stepped closer, my voice rising. You chose my brother over me, on our anniversary. You didn't just forget, you made a choice. And you're standing here acting like I'm the problem because I'm upset about it. Her eyes flashed with anger. You're overreacting. Jake isn't trying to compete with you. Maybe if you weren't so obsessed with the past, we wouldn't even be having this conversation. I felt like I'd been slapped. So this is my fault? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper now. Because I expected you to care? She didn't answer. And that silence was louder than anything she could have said. After what felt like an eternity, Emily finally spoke. I didn't want to be around you today. The words were simple, but they cut deeper than any scream. I stared at her, trying to process what she just said. What? She swallowed, her gaze flickering like she couldn't hold it steady. You've been distant for months. You're always brooding, always looking at me like I'm doing something wrong. I thought maybe being around other people would. I don't know, be easier. Easier. Not better. Not right. Just easier. I took a step back, like the space between us could somehow soften the blow. So instead of talking to me, you ran to him. Emily's jaw clenched. It's not like that. Then what is it like? I snapped. Because from where I'm standing, it looks exactly like that. She didn't answer. Again. And that's when I realized the truth wasn't just hiding in the spaces between her words. It was right there, plain as day. She just didn't have the guts to say it out loud. I shook my head, my chest tight with something I couldn't name yet. You know what? I'm done trying to figure it out for you. I turned to leave, but her voice stopped me. Luke! I didn't look back. Don't. The car felt like a coffin, small and suffocating. I gripped the steering wheel, staring straight ahead, my mind replaying everything. Her words, Jake's smug grin, the way she touched his arm without even thinking about it. By the time I got home, the anger had settled into something colder. Something sharper. I walked inside, straight to our bedroom. I opened the closet, stared at the row of neatly hung clothes, the shoes lined up just the way she liked. Then I grabbed an empty suitcase. The zipper rasped like a jagged whisper, the sound unnervingly loud in the suffocating quiet of our bedroom. I stared down at the empty suitcase sprawled open on the bed, its gaping maw ready to swallow pieces of the life Emily and I had built together. My hands hovered over the first drawer of her dresser, trembling slightly, not from weakness, but from a surge of emotions I couldn't even begin to untangle. Anger, betrayal, heartbreak, they all tangled together like wires sparking under pressure. I yanked the drawer open, the neat rows of her folded clothes mocking me. The scent of her perfume lingered faintly, a cruel reminder of everything that was slipping through my fingers. I grabbed handfuls of fabric, stuffing them into the suitcase with none of the care she would have used. This wasn't about organization. It was about erasure. Every shirt, every dress, every reminder, I wanted it gone. But it wasn't that simple. As I packed, I stumbled across things that made my heart stutter. A bracelet I'd bought her on our 3rd anniversary, tangled at the bottom of a drawer. A photo tucked into a book, capturing a moment when we were still us, smiling against the backdrop of some forgotten beach. I paused, the photo trembling between my fingers. We looked happy. No, more than that, we looked real. Not the strained smiles of recent years, but the genuine warmth that comes from believing you've found your forever. I clenched my jaw and shoved it into the suitcase without looking at it again. This wasn't nostalgia. This was survival. My phone buzzed on the nightstand, vibrating like it was trying to claw its way into my attention. Jake's name flashed on the screen. I stared at it, my heart pounding with a fresh wave of fury. I should have ignored it. Should have let it ring out into nothingness. But I answered. What? I snapped, my voice rougher than I intended. Jake's smug tone was as infuriating as ever. Wow, didn't think you'd pick up. Guess I caught you in the middle of your pity party? My grip on the phone tightened until my knuckles turned white. What do you want, Jake? He laughed, low and condescending. Relax, man. Just checking in. Emily's worried about you. Emily's worried about me. The words echoed in my head like a joke with a punchline I didn't get. Oh, she's worried now? I hissed. Tell me, Jake, was she worried before or after she decided to spend our anniversary with you? Jake's tone shifted, a hint of defensiveness slipping through the cracks. Look, don't make this into something it's not. Not? My voice rose despite myself. You think this is nothing? You think I didn't see the way she looked at you? The way you looked at her? There was a pause, a heavy silence filled with things neither of us wanted to admit. Finally, Jake spoke, his voice quieter now. It's not what you think. I laughed bitterly. Yeah? Then why can't you just say it? Why are you dancing around it like a coward? More silence. And that's when I knew. Jake didn't have to admit anything. His silence screamed the truth louder than words ever could. I ended the call without another word, tossing the phone onto the bed like it burned me. I sat down, burying my face in my hands. The weight of it all crashed over me like a tidal wave, every missed sign, every excuse I'd made for her, for him. How long had it been going on? Was it just emotional, or had it crossed lines I couldn't even bear to imagine? The worst part wasn't knowing she'd chosen someone else. It was knowing she'd chosen him. My brother. The betrayal was layered, like cuts stacked on top of each other, bleeding from wounds both fresh and old. The front door creaked open around midnight. I heard her keys clatter into the bowl by the door, her footsteps hesitant as they approached the bedroom. She stopped in the doorway, her eyes darting from the suitcase to me. What are you doing? Her voice was soft, like she thought gentleness could undo the damage. I didn't look at her. Packing. For what? I finally met her gaze, and for the first time, she looked genuinely unsettled. Not guilty. Not sorry. Just unsettled. For you, I said simply. Since you seem more at home somewhere else these days. She swallowed, her throat bobbing as she stepped inside. Luke, don't do this. We can talk about it. I stood up, feeling the heat rise in my chest. Now you want to talk? After ignoring me for weeks? After choosing him over me on the one day that was supposed to be ours? It's not what you think, she whispered. I laughed, harsh and bitter. That's funny. Jake said the same thing. She flinched like I'd slapped her. Good. Let her feel even a fraction of what I was drowning in. You know what hurts the most. I continued, my voice low. It's not just the betrayal. It's that you didn't even have the decency to hide it well. You didn't even respect me enough to pretend. Emily's face crumpled, but I didn't care. Her tears weren't mine to soothe anymore. She reached out, but I stepped back. Don't. Luke, don't. The word was sharp, final. I zipped the suitcase shut with one swift motion, the sound slicing through the tension like a blade. Then I picked it up and set it by the door. Where are you going to go? She whispered. I stared at her, my heart hollow and raw. I'm not going anywhere, I replied coldly. You are. Emily stood frozen, her eyes flickering between me and the suitcase by the door. The same door she had confidently walked out of earlier that day to attend his party. Funny how heavy it seemed now, How it loomed like a final judgment waiting to be carried out. Her lips trembled slightly, like she wanted to protest but didn't know where to start. Maybe because there was nothing left to say. Nothing that could stitch the pieces back together. Luke, please, can we just... I cut her off with a sharp shake of my head. No. We can't just anything anymore. The silence that followed was deafening, filled only by the faint tick of the wall clock, a sound I'd never noticed until that moment. She stepped forward, her voice softer. I didn't mean for things to get like this. I let out a bitter laugh, my hands balling into fists at my sides. Yeah? What exactly did you mean, Emily? Because from where I'm standing, this looks pretty deliberate. Her face flushed with frustration. You think I planned this? That I woke up one day and decided to ruin everything? I didn't answer. Because deep down, I didn't know what to think anymore. I moved past her, the tension between us thick enough to choke on. I couldn't stay in that room any longer. It felt too small, too full of memories that now felt like lies etched into the walls. I found myself in the kitchen, staring blankly at the counter where we used to sit with our morning coffee. The mug she'd always used, the one with the chipped handle, still sat in the sink from yesterday. It felt like a relic now, something belonging to another life. She followed me, her footsteps hesitant. Luke, she whispered, her voice breaking. I don't want this. I turned slowly, my chest burning. You don't want this? You think I do? You think I wanted to spend our anniversary realizing I don't even know the woman I married? She wiped at her face, her tears falling freely now. But I felt nothing. No urge to comfort her. No pity. Just emptiness. It didn't mean anything, she blurted suddenly, her words rushing out like they'd been dammed up for too long. I stared at her, my jaw clenching. What didn't mean anything? Her eyes darted away, her silence speaking louder than any confession. That's what I thought, I muttered, turning back to the counter. But her next words hit me like a slap. It was a mistake. I spun around, my anger boiling over. A mistake is forgetting to buy milk. A mistake is leaving your phone at work. What you did, what you chose, wasn't a mistake. It was a decision. She sobbed harder, sinking onto one of the kitchen stools. I didn't plan to. To what? To betray me? To lie to me? I snapped, my voice louder than I intended. Spare me the I didn't plan it speech. You knew exactly what you were doing when you walked out that door. She crumbled into herself, her shoulders shaking. But I couldn't bring myself to care. Not anymore. After a long stretch of silence, I finally asked the question that had been clawing at the edges of my mind. How long? She didn't respond. Just sat there, her hands covering her face. How long, Emily? I repeated, my voice low and dangerous. She looked up, her face streaked with tears. A few months, she whispered. I felt like the floor had been ripped out from under me. Months. Not weeks. Not days. Months. All that time I'd been wondering why she was distant, why she'd stopped laughing at my jokes, why her touch felt different. It was him. I swallowed the lump in my throat, nodding slowly. Of course. She stood up suddenly, her voice rising. But it wasn't serious. It didn't mean. Don't, I snapped, cutting her off. Don't you dare downplay it. She stepped closer, reaching for me, but I flinched back like her touch was poison. I still love you, she whispered desperately. I stared at her, my heart cold and unrecognizable. No, you don't. Because love doesn't do what she did. Love doesn't lie. Love doesn't choose someone else, especially not your own damn brother. I picked up the suitcase, my grip tight enough to make my knuckles white. She followed me to the door, her pleas a blur behind me. I didn't want to hear them. I didn't want more excuses, more half-truths. I opened the door, the cool night air hitting me like a slap. Where am I supposed to go? She whispered, her voice trembling. I turned to her one last time, my eyes empty. Not my problem. And then I closed the door. Not softly. Not gently. I closed it the way you slam the lid on something dead. The door clicked shut, the sound final and hollow, echoing through the empty house like a verdict I'd just passed on my own life. I stood there for a moment, my hand still on the doorknob, my chest heaving like I'd just sprinted a marathon. But there was no finish line, just the aftermath of everything I'd lost in the span of a single day. The house felt different now. Quieter. But not the comforting kind of quiet. This was the oppressive silence that wraps around you, heavy and suffocating, like the walls themselves are holding their breath, waiting to see what you'll do next. I didn't know what to do next. I wandered through the house aimlessly, my footsteps the only sound. It was strange how everything looked the same, yet felt so foreign. The couch where we'd binge-watched movies on lazy Sundays. The dining table where we'd shared countless meals, arguments, and inside jokes. The bedroom. I didn't even go in there. I couldn't. Her scent still lingered in the air, a faint trace of her shampoo mixed with the ghost of her perfume. It was like she hadn't really left. But she had. Not just tonight. She'd been leaving piece by piece, day by day, long before I'd packed that suitcase. I ended up in the kitchen, my hands gripping the edge of the counter as if it could hold me together. My reflection stared back at me from the dark window above the sink, someone I barely recognized. I was tired. Not just physically, but in that bone-deep way that seeps into every part of you. My phone buzzed on the counter, vibrating against the cold granite. I didn't have to look to know who it was. Jake. Of course it was him. I stared at the screen until it stopped ringing, the silence that followed somehow louder than the call itself. Then it buzzed again. And again. Finally, I picked it up, my thumb hovering over the screen. I could feel the rage bubbling just beneath the surface, like a volcano I'd been holding back for far too long. I answered without saying a word. Jake's voice came through, casual, like this was just another day. Luke, come on, man. You really think this is the way to handle things? His tone was the match to the gasoline inside me. The way to handle things? I repeated slowly, my voice low and deadly calm. Funny. I thought you would be the last person to lecture me on how to handle anything. He sighed, like I was the one being difficult. Look, it's not like we planned for any of this to happen. I laughed, sharp and bitter. You didn't plan it? Jake, you planned a party on my anniversary and flirted with my wife under my nose. Don't insult me by pretending this was some accident. There was a pause on his end, and when he spoke again, his voice was softer, almost defensive. It's not what you think. Those words again. If I heard that one more time, I was going to lose it. You know what's funny? I whispered. It's exactly what I think. I hung up before he could respond, tossing the phone onto the counter like it was contaminated. I grabbed a bottle of whiskey from the cabinet, one we'd been saving for some special occasion. I guess this counted. I didn't bother with a glass, just unscrewed the cap and took a long, burning swig. The liquor didn't numb the ache, but it made the edges of it blur just enough to breathe. I sank onto the floor, my back against the cabinets, staring into nothing. The truth is, I'd seen the signs. I'd felt the distance, the shift in her laughter, the way her phone was always just out of reach. I'd noticed it all, but I'd convinced myself it was just a phase. That every couple went through rough patches. That love was enough. But love isn't enough when respect is gone. And Emily had taken that with her when she walked out the door, and maybe long before that. Hours passed, I don't know how many, before I noticed my phone buzzing again. This time it wasn't Jake. It was Emily. A text. I'm sorry. I didn't mean for it to happen like this. Can we talk tomorrow? I stared at the screen, the words blurring slightly as the weight of exhaustion and alcohol settled over me. I didn't reply. What was left to say? I woke up on the kitchen floor, my neck stiff and my mouth dry. Sunlight crept through the blinds, casting long shadows that felt too sharp, too real. Reality hit me like a second punch, one I wasn't ready for. I dragged myself to my feet, groaning as my body protested. My phone was still on the counter, the screen dark and silent. No new messages. Good. I didn't want apologies. I wanted answers. I showered, dressed, and stared at myself in the mirror for a long time. There was a hollow look in my eyes, like a piece of me had been carved out overnight. But beneath the emptiness was something else. Resolve. I picked up my phone, scrolled past Emily's message, and dialed another number. Jake's. He answered on the first ring. Luke! I cut him off. We're meeting. Today. Face to face. A pause. Then, yeah. Okay. Where? I gave him the name of a park near the outskirts of town. Neutral ground. Somewhere we wouldn't be interrupted. Somewhere I could finally look him in the eye and ask the question that had been eating me alive. Why? The park was almost empty when I arrived. A cold, gray sky stretched overhead, the clouds thick like the weight pressing down on my chest. The faint rustle of leaves filled the air, and a biting wind cut through the thin jacket I'd thrown on without thinking. It felt fitting. Nature itself seemed to be holding its breath for what was about to happen. I parked my car, turned off the engine, and sat there for a moment, staring at the steering wheel. My fingers clenched it so tightly my knuckles turned white. I wasn't sure if it was anger or fear coursing through me. Maybe both. How do you face the person who broke not just your heart but your trust? Jake arrived 10 minutes late, as if even now he couldn't be bothered to respect my time. His sleek black truck pulled into the lot, the tires crunching over gravel. He stepped out like nothing was wrong, dressed casually in jeans and a gray hoodie, his sunglasses shielding whatever expression he wore beneath. I got out of my car slowly, every step toward him heavier than the last. We met near an old, weathered picnic table, the kind with peeling paint and names carved into the wood. A testament to things people thought would last forever. Funny, isn't it? Jake leaned against the table, crossing his arms like this was just another casual chat between brothers. Luke! He greeted, his voice smooth, too calm. Like he wasn't standing there as the man who'd betrayed me in the worst possible way. I didn't respond. Just stared at him, letting the silence stretch until it became uncomfortable even for him. Finally I spoke. Why? Jake sighed, running a hand through his hair, a rehearsed gesture I'd seen 1,000 times before when he was trying to play the part of the good guy. It wasn't supposed to happen like this. He started. I laughed bitterly. You mean screwing my wife wasn't part of the plan? Funny how that just happens, right? He flinched slightly but covered it with a smirk. That same damn smirk he'd worn since we were kids, like he was always one step ahead, always untouchable. It wasn't like that, he muttered. I stepped closer, my hands clenched at my sides. Then tell me, Jake. What was it like? Enlighten me. He hesitated, his jaw tightening. Emily and I, we didn't plan it. We were just... He stopped, searching for words that wouldn't sound like knives, but failing miserably. It was a connection. Something neither of us expected. A connection. I felt something snap inside me. A connection? I repeated, my voice low and shaking. She was my wife, Jake. The woman I planned a life with. The woman I trusted. And you were supposed to be my brother. My own blood. His face hardened. And you were a husband who didn't even notice she was miserable. You think this happened out of nowhere? She was lonely, Luke. She felt invisible. I didn't create that. You did. The words hit me like a punch to the gut, but not because they were true. Because they were exactly the kind of deflection Jake had always been good at, shifting blame, dodging responsibility. I stepped closer, our faces inches apart now. You know what's funny? I whispered. I thought you'd at least pretend to feel guilty. But here you are, standing like it's my fault you couldn't keep your hands off my wife. Jake didn't back down. Maybe if you'd paid attention to her, none of this would have happened. That was it. I swung. My fist connected with his jaw, the impact sending a sharp jolt through my knuckles. He stumbled back, caught off guard, his hand flying to his face. For a second, there was just the sound of both of us breathing heavily, the cold air mixing with the heat of our rage. Then he lunged out. We collided like a storm meeting solid ground. Fists flew, wild and fueled by years of resentment buried under the surface. It wasn't just about Emily anymore. It was about everything, every rivalry, every smug look, every time he made me feel less than. We grappled, punching, shoving, rolling onto the cold, hard ground. My vision blurred with a mix of fury and adrenaline. I didn't care about winning. I just wanted to feel something other than the emptiness that had swallowed me whole since the night she chose him. Eventually we broke apart, both of us gasping for breath, our faces bloodied and bruised. Jake sat up first, spitting blood onto the ground. He wiped his mouth, then laughed, a dry, bitter sound that made my skin crawl. "You feel better now?" he rasped. I didn't answer. Just stared at him, feeling nothing but disgust. Not just at him. At myself. Forever believing that family meant anything. As I stood up, brushing dirt from my clothes, I looked down at him one last time. "I hope she was worth it," I whispered. Jake didn't respond. He didn't need to. I turned and walked away, each step lighter than the last, not because anything had been fixed, but because I knew I'd left everything that mattered behind in that park. Emily. Jake. The person I used to be. Gone. I didn't go home after leaving the park. I drove without a destination, the road stretching out ahead of me like it held answers I couldn't find. The dried blood on my knuckles throbbed with every beat of my heart, each pulse a reminder of the fight, of Jake's smug grin, of Emily's betrayal. My jaw clenched so tightly I thought it might crack. But it wasn't pain I wanted to escape. It was the silence. The kind of silence that seeps into your bones, the one that follows you even when you turn up the radio, roll down the windows, or scream into the wind. Eventually, I found myself parked outside a rundown motel on the edge of town. The neon sign buzzed faintly, flickering like it couldn't decide whether to stay lit or give up entirely. I knew the feeling. I paid cash for a room, didn't want to see my name on any receipts. Didn't want to be Luke, the guy whose wife slept with his brother. I just wanted to disappear, even if it was just for the night. The room smelled like stale cigarettes and regret. The bed creaked when I sat down, the thin mattress sagging under my weight. I stared at the cracked ceiling, the yellowed paint peeling in the corners like it was trying to escape too. I pulled out my phone. No new messages. Part of me expected Emily to call. To send some pathetic apology or excuse. But there was nothing. Just silence. I scrolled through old photos, my thumb hovering over pictures of us, smiling, laughing, pretending. Our wedding day. Vacations. Lazy Sunday mornings with coffee and messy hair. It was like looking at strangers. Eventually, I tossed the phone across the room, letting it land with a soft thud against the stained carpet. I didn't sleep much. Couldn't. My mind replayed everything. Jake's words, Emily's face, the way she flinched when I told her to leave. It looped like a bad movie I couldn't turn off. By dawn, I was exhausted but too restless to stay. I grabbed my keys, not bothering to shower, and left without looking back. I didn't know where I was going until I got there. Our house. Or rather, the house. It didn't feel like mine anymore. Emily's car was in the driveway, right where she'd left it. My chest tightened, a mix of anger and something else, something darker. I walked inside without knocking. Why should I? It was still legally my home. She was in the kitchen, her back to me, making coffee like it was any other morning. Like she hadn't torn my world apart. The audacity of it, the normalcy, made my blood boil. She turned when she heard the door, her face pale, eyes puffy from crying. Good. At least she'd lost some sleep too. Luke. She started, her voice soft, uncertain. I held up a hand, cutting her off before she could say another word. Don't, I said sharply. I'm not here for apologies. She swallowed, her hands trembling slightly as she gripped the coffee mug. Then why are you here? I stared at her for a long moment, the words heavy on my tongue. To get answers. She nodded slowly, as if she'd been expecting this. She gestured toward the table, but I didn't sit. I stayed standing, like my body refused to get comfortable in a space that no longer felt like home. "How long?" I asked, my voice low, controlled. She flinched, then whispered, "About 6 months." 6 months. Half a year of lies. "Why him?" I asked next, the question burning more than I expected. Emily stared at her coffee like it held the answer. "I don't know," she whispered. "It just happened." I let out a bitter laugh. "That's the best you've got. It just happened?" She looked up, her eyes filled with tears. "You were distant, Luke. You barely looked at me anymore. We stopped talking, stopped laughing. I felt invisible." I shook my head, the rage simmering beneath the surface. "So instead of fixing it, you ran to him?" She didn't respond. Silence. Again. I stepped closer, my voice dropping to a whisper. "You could have left. You could have told me you were unhappy. But you didn't. You stayed, and you lied. Every day." Tears streamed down her face, but I didn't feel sorry. She earned every drop of that regret. "I didn't mean to fall for him," she choked out. The words hit me harder than Jake's fists ever could. Fall for him. So it wasn't just physical. It was worse. I nodded slowly, my heart turning to stone. "Thanks for the honesty," I muttered. "You finally told the truth. A little late, but hey, better than nothing." She sobbed, covering her face with her hands, but I didn't care. Not anymore. I turned to leave, pausing at the door. "Oh," I added without looking back. "I'll have the divorce papers sent over soon." And with that I walked out, slamming the door behind me, not out of anger, but finality. Some doors deserve to stay closed. The door slammed behind me with a finality that echoed louder in my chest than in the empty house I left behind. My footsteps felt heavier than ever, each one pressing into the pavement like I was trying to leave a mark, proof that I'd walked away, that I could. The cold morning air hit my face like a slap, but it felt good. Real. Unlike everything else that had unraveled over the past few days. My hands were still shaking, but not from the chill. It was the aftermath, the rage, the heartbreak, the disbelief, that refused to settle. I got into my car, gripping the steering wheel like it was the only thing anchoring me to reality. My reflection stared back at me in the rearview mirror, red-rimmed eyes, a bruise darkening along my jaw from the fight with Jake, and an expression I didn't recognize. This wasn't me. Not anymore. By noon, I was sitting across from a divorce attorney, the sterile office smelling of coffee and stale paper. The walls were lined with certificates, all neatly framed, proof of the man's expertise in tearing lives apart with legal precision. He introduced himself, but I barely listened. My mind was a whirlwind, the words divorce, adultery, and irreconcilable differences flashing like neon signs in my head. "So," he began, flipping open a yellow legal pad. "Tell me what brings you in today." I almost laughed. It felt ridiculous, like the answer should have been obvious. But I swallowed the bitterness and started talking. As I recounted everything, Emily's betrayal, Jake's smug grin, the fight, the hollow silence that followed, I felt the words pour out faster, like they'd been bottled up for too long. The attorney nodded occasionally, jotting notes with a pen that scratched softly against the paper. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair, his expression unreadable. "This will be straightforward, given the circumstances. Infidelity cases usually are. Do you want to pursue any claims beyond the divorce itself? Emotional distress, perhaps?" Emotional distress. I almost laughed again. As if putting a legal label on my broken heart would fix anything. "No," I muttered. "I just want it over." He nodded, sliding a stack of papers across the desk. "We'll get started on the paperwork. She'll be served within the week." The words felt like a punch to the gut. Served. As if it was just business. Maybe it was. After leaving the lawyer's office, I drove without a destination again. The city blurred past me, streets we used to walk together, coffee shops where we'd shared quiet mornings, parks where we'd talked about our future. I found myself outside my parents' old house. The place was empty now, long since sold after they passed. But the memories lingered like shadows: birthdays, family dinners, laughter that felt distant and foreign now. I sat there for a long time, staring at the chipped paint and overgrown lawn. Jake and I had played in that yard, brothers chasing each other under the summer sun, back when betrayal was just a word we didn't understand. I wondered when he decided I was nothing more than competition. When did I stop being his brother and start being an obstacle? I'd never get that answer. And maybe that was the hardest part. Later that night, back in the motel room that felt more like home than the house I'd shared with Emily, my phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. "Luke, I know I'm the last person you want to hear from, but I need to talk. Please. Just one conversation. That's all I'm asking. Jake." Of course. I stared at the screen, debating whether to respond. Part of me wanted to ignore it, let him stew in the mess he'd created. But curiosity, or maybe a masochistic need for closure, got the better of me. I typed a simple reply. "Tomorrow. 10 a.m. The pier." No more hiding behind texts or half-truths. If he wanted to talk, he'd have to face me. Face the wreckage he helped build. The next morning, the pier was almost empty, just a few fishermen casting lines into the gray water, their silhouettes hunched against the cold wind. Jake was already there when I arrived, leaning against the railing, staring out at the water like it held answers. He turned when he heard my footsteps, his face a mix of regret and exhaustion. We stood in silence for a minute, the waves crashing below us, filling the space where words should have been. Finally, he spoke. "I didn't come to make excuses." "Good," I snapped. "Because I'm not here to hear them." Jake nodded, stuffing his hands into his jacket pockets. I don't even know how it happened, Luke. I wasn't trying to hurt you." I laughed bitterly. "You weren't trying to? Jake, you had to go out of your way to do what you did. That wasn't an accident. That was a choice." He looked down, his jaw clenched. "I was jealous, okay. I always have been." That caught me off guard. "Jealous?" I echoed, my voice dripping with disbelief. "Of what? My marriage? My life? You could have had anything, Jake. But you had to have her too." His eyes met mine, filled with something that almost resembled remorse. "I didn't want to ruin your life," he whispered. "Well," I said, stepping closer, my voice low and steady. "Congratulations. You did." We stood there, the weight of everything unsaid pressing down harder than the cold wind off the water. Finally, I shook my head, stepping back. "This is the last time we ever speak," I said quietly. "You're not my brother anymore." Jake didn't argue. He just nodded, his shoulders slumping like the words had knocked the air out of him. I turned and walked away, not looking back. Some people don't deserve second chances. I didn't look back. Not at Jake standing alone on the pier, not at the life I'd left behind, and definitely not at the version of myself I'd buried in the wreckage of my marriage. The cold wind hit my face as I walked away, but it felt different this time, like a slap that didn't sting as much as it should. Maybe because numbness had settled in, spreading through me like frostbite, dulling everything that used to hurt. This was the end. But endings aren't neat. They don't come with tidy closure or clean breaks. They're messy, tangled in the debris of what-ifs and could-have-beens. And even as I left Jake behind on that pier, his betrayal clung to me like a shadow point. 2 weeks later, I found myself back in the sterile office of the divorce attorney, the same stiff chairs, the same faint scent of paper and ink. Emily sat across from me, her eyes hollow, her face pale. She looked like a ghost of the woman I once knew. But the thing about ghosts is, they're dead. You can't bring them back. The divorce papers sat between us, crisp and official, like a coffin for our marriage. The attorney cleared his throat, breaking the heavy silence. "If you both agree to the terms, you can sign now." I didn't hesitate. I picked up the pen and scrawled my name on the dotted line, the ink flowing smoothly, as if eager to sever the last thread. Emily's hand trembled as she signed. When it was done, the attorney gathered the papers, stacking them neatly, unaware that he was holding the remains of something that had once felt unbreakable. As we stood to leave, Emily's voice broke the silence. "Luke! I'm sorry!" I turned to her, searching for any flicker of the woman I'd loved. But all I saw was a stranger wearing her face. "Yeah," I replied quietly. "So am I." And then I walked out. Returning to the house after it was officially mine felt surreal. The walls were bare, the furniture gone. Emily had taken what she wanted when she moved out. But she'd left more behind than she thought. Memories clung to every corner, the echo of her laughter in the hallway, the faint scent of her perfume in the bedroom, the ghosts of arguments and apologies that never meant enough. I stood in the empty living room, the silence pressing down on me. I thought I'd feel relief. Freedom. But all I felt was emptiness. So I did the only thing that made sense. I started packing. Not her things. Mine. I wasn't going to stay in a house built on broken promises. Weeks turned into months. I found a small apartment on the other side of town, nothing fancy, just enough space for me and the few things that mattered. I got back into a routine, work filling the hours, sleep filling the nights, barely. But it was better than lying awake, haunted by memories of what used to be. I didn't hear from Jake. I didn't hear from Emily. And that was exactly how I wanted it. But healing isn't linear. It's not a straight line from broken to better. It's jagged, filled with setbacks and days where the weight feels too heavy. I had those days. But I also had days where I didn't think about her at all. And that's when I knew I was moving on. One day, months after the dust had settled, I found an envelope in my mailbox. No return address. Just my name written in familiar handwriting. Emily's. I stood there for a long time, the envelope heavy in my hands. Part of me wanted to rip it up unread. But curiosity is a stubborn thing. I opened it. "Luke, I don't know if you'll ever read this. I don't even know if I deserve to have my words reach you. But there are things I need to say, even if they don't matter anymore. I was wrong. About everything. About Jake. About us. I thought I was chasing happiness, but all I found was regret. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't expect anything. I just wanted you to know, you were always enough. I was the one who wasn't. I hope you find peace. I hope you find someone who sees you the way I should have. I'm sorry. Emily." I read it once. Then I read it again. And then I burned it. Because her words didn't matter anymore. Life didn't magically fix itself after that. There were no grand epiphanies, no sudden bursts of clarity. Just small moments, quiet mornings, new routines, a growing sense of peace in the spaces where pain used to live. I wasn't the same person I was before Emily and Jake. But maybe that was okay. Maybe that was the point. Because sometimes, the only way to find yourself is to lose everything else first. And as I stood in my new apartment, the sunlight streaming through the windows, I realized something. I wasn't broken. I was just beginning.